The election was an interesting election. Obviously, people wanted change. Over 60% of the people said that they wanted change, close to 70%. And therefore, because Mr. Harper couldn't present the face of change, it fell upon either Mr. Mulcair or Mr. Trudeau to actually be the agent of change. And in a long campaign, over 70 days, it became clear that because Mr. Trudeau separated himself, distinguished himself from both Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Harper in terms of wanting to spend more money on infrastructure and communities, wanted to and was willing to take the risk of running deficits. Therefore, he clearly distinguished himself from both of them and became that agent of change. And because of that, and because of the way Mr. Trudeau campaigned, as a person who wanted to bring Canadians together rather than dividing Canadians, and wanted to look to the future rather than getting into the past quarrels, wanted to build Canada into a better society and create a better image of Canada abroad. I think all of that played into Mr. Trudeau's victory, and the fact that he was young and had a famous name didn't hurt either. But Canadians have huge expectations of Mr. Trudeau, and Mr. Trudeau played into those expectations and actually increased those expectations with all the promises he made. It's natural for politicians to do that. Mr. Trudeau indicated that he wanted to create a momentum in the economy by spending money on infrastructure, green technologies and the like, by running deficits. He said he was going to get 25,000 refugees from Syria into Canada by the end of December this year, in the next 2 months essentially. And he wanted to make amendments to Bill C-51. He also wanted to, as the first piece of legislation, when he comes back into Parliament in December, the first piece of legislation he wants to make sure was to do with raising the taxes of the extremely wealthy and giving tax breaks to the middle income Canadians. Those are some of the immediate promises, but there are many other promises. He's promised to work on the environment, he's promised to work on healthcare, advanced education, and creating better environment and better opportunities for the Indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities across the country, ordering a murdered and missing women's inquiry very quickly, and he's already reinstated the long form census, which the Conservatives had done away with. So all of those promises, some of them are easy to fulfill, others are going to be somewhat difficult, but not necessarily impossible. What happens over the next 4 years? I don't believe anybody can foretell what will happen. I think that Mr. Trudeau has made some promises. Some will be easy to keep, others will be more difficult, not necessarily impossible to keep. And in those 4 years, what other things happen around the world or inside Canada that need to be taken into account? One of the first things he has to deal with is his promise that he was going to take the fighter bombers out of Iraq and not participate in the bombing missions, and that he was going to look at reformulating the Canadian mission in Iraq, and that is going to be a difficult issue. It's not an easy issue, but not an impossible one. What happens in Iraq on the ground? What happens in Syria on the ground? What happens if there are any terrorist incidents within Canada itself? Heaven forbid. So all of these things and any of these things can change the direction of the government or the reaction of the government, and it's pretty hard to tell. Hopefully he does a good job over the next 4 years, but time will tell.